Good evening. It is evening. Normally I make videos late morning, just after my meal time. But I'm going to try this evening. We've had our evening, well, it's more afternoon chanting, because we go to our temple at the top of the mountain at 4 o'clock. The bell is rung down here and you can hear that all around, and we go to the temple just for puja just once a day. It's not a morning puja, evening puja, and sometimes during the day puja kind of place. And it's a nice, simple ceremony with some chanting and some lay people and other residents here, the nuns, mechis, some upasakas, upasikas, and takes around about 1 hour. So now is about 6 o'clock. I've had my nampana, which is our afternoon refreshment, which for me is usually just a cup of coffee, sometimes a cold drink. But I want to talk about a comment, which is a very nice comment from Sensai K. San, who is from Malaysia. And if you don't mind, I'll read this. Thank you for this talk in an informal setting. Yes, perhaps for some people, myself included, it is relaxing and easy to comprehend. I come from a country colonized by the British, Malaysia, and old-timers like myself enjoy listening to Dharma in English. A suggestion: can you make a video anytime in the future specifically directed to senior citizens and the practice of Dharma? As our human lives are getting limited by the day, and of course one can pass away any time, what are the best practices to do, and how often should we do them? For example, prayers, meditation, giving to others, etc. Of course, many more practices could be performed, but we are limited by resources, time, and so forth, and also challenged to get a Buddhist center, to get to a Buddhist center to get teachings. Thank you, Phra Dan. Well, thank you, Sensei K. San, for that good reminder that Dharma is for people of all ages, and increasingly these days all countries, because of the internet. Now, if you're young and watching this, don't be put off. This is not just a video for old people or senior people. I don't know how old you are, Sensei. I mean, I'm old myself, really, 55 now. But when you get to 55, you tend to know people, a lot of people who are now in their 80s. People in their 80s whom, when you were young, were fun-loving, running around, doing this, doing that, working hard, partying hard, enjoying life, depending on the country and the culture you've been brought up in. The usual things of people of that age. And our parents, I'm referring to, really, I suppose, uncles, aunties, their friends. Now they're of course all in their 80s, and this is the cycle of life, isn't it? We're born, we age, we get sick, and we die. Now the advantage that the older people have, having got to the latter stages of their lives, so let's say retirement age upwards of there, or around the 70s upwards, or late 60s, is that they are more in tune, perhaps, and again it's rather dependent on culture, with the inevitability of death. Now, one of the practices that Buddhist monks are very encouraged to adopt and continue with continually throughout their developments is Marana Nusati, which is contemplation of death. So in the chanting this evening, the monks and the lay people, we chant not only the aspects of the physical body, the 32 body parts, but the relatively short chant that we are of the nature to age, nature to get sick, and nature to die, and all things that we hold dearly we will be parted from. And this is a reminder to the younger generation of that inevitability. But of course, we can die at any time. We don't have to be old. Tragically, young people die often, and sometimes people can't cope with that, and it's dreadful. Well, why he was so young? But that is nature. You look at the leaves on the ground from trees, they're of all colours, from brown and wrinkly to newly sprouted or grown leaves of bright green. They can fall at any time, as can we. But of course, statistically and expectantly and quite rightly, we look to live to an old age, and the usual cycle of life is to get old, get sick and die. We are born with this inevitability. So drawing your attention to that is primarily how I can address this question, which, let me just go to the question parts of your comment, directed to senior citizens. Your lives are getting limited, okay, by the day. What are the best practices to do? So, you know, younger people, as I've just said, monks and such like, younger monks are encouraged to contemplate death. Now, as you get older, it's not so much necessarily necessary to contemplate this. So actively, as it is there, you have continual bodily reminders of the fallibility of this human life. And not to want to sound depressing and miserable about it, it's just the truth. The Buddha taught us there's suffering and an end of suffering. Now, the Four Noble Truths go into some more detail about that, and this is that there is suffering, a cause of suffering, an end of suffering, and the path leading to the end of suffering. Now, in terms of practices, they are detailed in that path leading to the end of suffering. And that really is for all ages, both young and old. But you take from it the bits that are appropriate to not only your stages in life and physical age. Here we're going to hear some nice little animals. This is geckos calling this evening. And if you are looking at the slats behind me, or even out of the window, you may see some. Sorry to interrupt you there. But yes, we can draw from this noble, draw from this noble Eightfold Path wonderful resources in itself to assist with our practice. But summed up, that Noble Eightfold Path is about sila, samadhi, panya, so moral virtue, meditation, and the development of the mind. You know, the older we get, the wiser we become. So they say. But, you know, that is true to some extent, because just life's experience in itself develops some aspect of knowing. Suffering in itself is a teacher. We experience suffering and we experience the end of suffering. Now, there is the first and the most primary teaching of the Buddha. suffering and the end of suffering. Because any ailments, illnesses that arise generally are fixed and go away. But knowing this and drawing our attention towards this is something we don't tend to do so much. So by bringing our attention to this nature of ours, of anicca, impermanence, the impermanence of, say, pain, for instance, and it's the cause of suffering as a result of it, we are educated to understand the aspect of not self, it not being within our control. So anicca, dukkha, anatta, which are the characteristics of existence, the fundamental faculties of our very life. Anicca, impermanence, dukkha, suffering, and anatta, not self or out of our control. As we age, whether subtly and subconsciously, or whether directly and very consciously, we will become aware of that very nature. And this is what we are trying to develop when we're younger, or when we were younger, because it seems so far away. So this is why in monasteries, young monks and all monks are encouraged to practice this contemplation of death contemplation, marana nusati. So in terms of how you can practice more, one thing the Buddha taught, that all we need to learn is within this fathom length bag of skin, this body basically. So there are so many lessons in the Dharma for us all, of all ages, whether we are old or young. But what I do understand and what I'm sensitive to in kind of reading between the lines, let me just quickly check with the questions there. Best practices to do, how often we should do them, for example, prayers, meditation, giving to others, dana, and of course all the other practices. Right, prayers, we don't really call it prayers in... Prayers translates, I know, in different languages. But in my culture and in English, prayers means praying to a God, a higher power, a supreme being for help. Well, of course, in Buddhism we don't do that. We look to ourselves to help ourselves, firstly. And then by understanding through keeping moral virtue and through meditation, we develop this wisdom of understanding in order to help ourselves, which in turn helps others. So we're never really praying, but the chanting, like we have just been doing in the temple, can often be referred to as evening prayers, morning prayers, or praying, because it's like a religious ceremony, and it is. I'm in a Buddhist country now, which is very much, it's a religion. And I think maybe if I was to understand Thai, they probably call it prayers here too. But praying means asking in terms of the literal translation of the word. And we're more reminding in our chanting than asking. There aren't really any chants where we're saying, hey, please Buddha help us, because that's not the way it is. We are reminding ourselves of how the Buddha helped himself to then help others. And this is the important thing to understand. Now, whether you like chanting or whether you don't like chanting, it doesn't matter. One can use chanting as a practice if you enjoy it, or you can leave it alone. In terms of practices that you can so what does it say? How often you do this? Well, you know, you're retired. You're no longer needing to stick to some kind of reset schedule, or even if we're not retired and we're younger, one should practice within your abilities. So say for instance with giving, we can only give what we have, never deplete your resources. In terms of financially, the Buddha set this down specifically, and giving certainly doesn't need to be financial, never needs to be financial. Sometimes it's the easiest way to give, and therefore that isn't necessarily the best. But he even specified no more than 20% of your available income. Actually, that figure in the suttas, it's detailed, but that's not a specific, that's not a necessity, even that, because of course giving is your time, your listening ability, your service to others is more important. And the highest form of giving is keeping moral virtue, keeping the precepts, keeping sila, keeping the 5 precepts of no killing, stealing, lying, sexual misconduct, killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, or taking of intoxicants. Because by keeping those precepts, you are giving the gift of fearlessness to all of those around you, that you will cause them no harm, and also to yourself, you're causing yourself no harm. So in terms of giving, yeah, please, giving is a very good attribute. It's the first of the parami, the 10 perfections in life. 10 perfections, skills we develop over many lifetimes, but during this lifetime may only have the opportunity to develop 1 or 2 of them. But we strive with effort and energy to develop them. Whether we know the list of the 10 parami, it's all included in the Noble Eightfold Path in different forms, but it's there in terms of establishing right view and right intention, right speech, our right livelihood, right effort, and mindfulness and meditation. These things are included in the Noble Eightfold Path to guide us. And what I can say to you about that, how often we should do these things, is really what you can, what you're comfortable with. The first thing is to do no harm, and that starts with yourself. And being kind to yourself, and this accounts to all ages. The Dharma is applicable to all ages. Being kind to yourself is the first step, because then you can help others. But by being kind to yourself also, you are giving relief to others from their concerns about you. As we get older, more and more people worry about us. So give them less to worry about by looking after yourself. And meditation, well, you have maybe more time. And okay, getting to local Buddhist centres, temples, monasteries may be difficult. And I'm not making the assumption just because the writer Sensei has contacted me through this medium on YouTube and through the comments. I'm not making the assumption, of course, that all old people have access to the internet, but of course during recent years, possibly because of the pandemic, the availability and access to the Dharma from monasteries, from monastics, from other sources has become far greater over this resource, the internet, than it ever has been, and accelerated perhaps somewhat, bringing the temples, bringing the practices into your home. But of course not everybody has this. But there are also a huge number of books, more books now, in all kinds of different styles, you know, to suit the readers, of Dharma books, and they are usually freely available. Check out the availability of them, or ask someone to check these things out for you online. But we can read if we're not in tune with technology, and even prefer not to be sitting in front of a computer screen. And reading is a very beautiful way to understand or listen to the Dharma. Transcribed or written down Dharma talks in book form, and there are many of them, are very beautiful to read, because some of them are, to read a 40-minute Dharma talk doesn't take that long, no more than about 40 minutes, and you can find time. It's not like reading a whole section of scriptures which you have to pick up and put down, pick up and put down. You can listen to or read a Dharma talk in book form relatively easily. And many of these books and publications are available for free. And in most countries they should be free. Dharma books are supposed to be free, because as monastics we're not allowed to charge. Well, we wouldn't want to charge for them. So this is one way that we can all practice, but when you are senior citizens, as we are addressing in this little talk this evening, a format, a media that you're more used to. And what can we do in terms of giving? Well, apart from the, I was going to say the easy option of the financial side, that isn't the most important. One way we can help in terms of giving is by sharing the Dharma. If you know of people who can't get out or don't have access to the internet, maybe you could get books sent to them. This is, in some countries, a very easy option. You can go onto websites where you can have books sent to those people, or you can take the books round. And this brings in another aspect that is very much a part of kindness, metta, loving kindness, compassion, karuna, and also a way of developing mudita and upekkha, so joy in other people's happiness, and the goal of upekkha, equanimity, that stability of mood, of mind, that we are trying to establish those 4 Brahma Viharas in our hearts, towards others and towards ourselves, in order to become equanimous. And this is part of the path towards enlightenment. Equanimity, upekkha, is one of the 7 factors of enlightenment. So metta and kindness, metta comes after dana on those list of parami, but you can combine the two. Visit someone older, take them Dharma books if you know they're of interest to them. But I know people in their 80s, and I mean, my mother, for example, she's never been inclined towards particular religions, or she doesn't watch these videos, I'm sure, because she's not inclined towards going on YouTube and things like that. But I send her a Buddhist calendar from my monasteries in England. Well, they're around the world, but that from the Forest Sangha, English Forest Sangha Trust, I think it's called. And I've sent her Dharma books from time to time. Not to proselytize, to be evangelical, because, you know, this doesn't work. People who are not Buddhist aren't interested in being told about Buddhism. That isn't the way. And the Buddha taught us, even as monks, not to do that. We practice. We do the practice. We practice sila, samadhi, and we develop our minds, panya. People will inquire as a result of seeing the change in us, if they're family members or friends that know us. It may take some time, but when they come to you, they're more receptive towards it. But that doesn't mean there aren't many books of immense interest to all people about, so biographies of monks. Many people who watch this aren't Buddhist, but I suppose are interested in why I am a monk and why I'm where I am, living the way I live. And this is a great introduction to Buddhism, because the reasons of why I am what I am, doing what I'm doing, and living where I am, is because this is how the Buddha taught us to practice. And I'm following the Buddha's instructions. But I first came to Buddhism through meditation. So, like through the back door, if you like, rather than being brought up in a Buddhist country and then learning meditation. The other way around, as is so often in the Western countries. So you can help each other, we can help each other in our senior years to share the Dharma, both in book form or give guidance to people on the internet, send them links of Dharma talks you've heard, show them how to access it on their phones, where they can listen rather than watch, or on their computers, or even on their TVs and whatever these days. You know, you can do all kinds of things. You can share, help people with this. So you're helping them and they're helping you by giving you the opportunity to give. How often should you meditate? Well, you know, as often as you can. And when you have time on your hands, the more you meditate, the better it is for you. The problem, the most commonly asked question is, well, I don't have time to meditate. How can we still develop wisdom? As we get older and we're no longer working, then we often have more time. Make the most of that. Now, you can make a little routine that I will meditate in the morning for 1 hour, and 1 hour at lunchtime, or 1 hour in the evening, or I'll have sessions of 3 hours on this day and that hour a day, and there is nothing wrong with that at all. That's a good idea also. It does help to give you some form of structure and discipline, and it's also a very nice way to set out and lay out your day. But one thing that is very important as part of our practice is reflection. And it's not an obvious thing, because it doesn't come out so much as a direct instruction in the teachings, but can be understood from the Buddha's teachings. Reflection is just maybe at the end of the day, just spending a little time before meditation, reflecting on the day so far. Did I keep the precepts? Did I stick to my meditation routine? Was I able to read up or listen to some Dharma? Just asking those few questions reminds you, tomorrow I'll try to do that, and helps you on your path towards enlightenment. Now, of course, in our senior years, approaching death, we are looking to improve our understanding of the Buddha's teachings experientially. Whatever age we are, the Buddha's teachings are not theoretical. Of course, if you look at them in books on the bookshelf, that is theoretical Buddhism. It's there in books on the bookshelf. But if you practice, it is experiential. And it is this practice of moral virtue, meditation, and developing those wholesome mind states, reducing the unwholesome mind states, that leads us ultimately towards that goal of Nibbana. Freedom from suffering in this lifetime, and the attainment of Nibbana, which means no further rebirth into samsara, this cycle of birth and death, growing up, aging, sickness and death, and all of the suffering in between. And of course there's always immense pleasure and joy in our lifetimes too. But understand the good times and the joy and the pleasure as also subject to anicca, impermanence, and therefore also a cause of dukkha, suffering. So however joyful or wonderful an experience is, it is like something that you don't want. It is impermanent, and therefore, by the nature of its impermanence, creates suffering also. In equal quantities, pain can create suffering whilst you have it because you don't want it, but pleasure can create suffering whilst you don't have it because you do want it. Does that make sense? This is dukkha as a result of anicca. And panya is wisdom, is just understanding that. So it's experiential, and the longer we are alive, living this life, enjoying it, or struggling through it, we are learning from this physical body, from our thinking minds, but this wisdom is developing in our hearts. And it is this that in our final hours we look to. But in our final hours we should be referring to all of the good, recollecting, remembering the good things we've done in this life. And this helps to build confidence and comfort and reassurance that life wasn't all that bad. I did some good. And we've all done some bad things, but that is in the past. And yes, surely karma is such that doing bad things will result in bad results. Sorry, I'm getting a little distracted because you might not be able to hear this, but I can hear some things. I think it's just the dogs coming back. But it's probably a cue to finish this talk, because when Bing Bang and Bong Bong come back, they settle down underneath here. This is up on stilts, and one on the steps. One on the top of the veranda. So it's probably a good cue. I've probably spoken for too long. Monks, lay people, old people, young people, we're all subject to the Dharma, which is just the truth. The teachings of the Buddha, which is the truth. Buddhist or not Buddhist, Christian, Muslim, any array of religions, cultures, all beings are subject to this same truth. And in summary, if you can continue into your senior years with this practice of sila firstly, and yes, meditation as much as you can. You can sit more comfortably. You don't have to be performing yogic activities. You're at home, but sit on a firm chair and sit upright if you can. Sit in your wheelchair if you're in a wheelchair. It doesn't matter. You can still practice walking meditation, just walking up and down, either in the garden or in the yard or in your sitting room or bedroom. You don't have to walk far, just walk slowly, back and forth a little bit, a few steps, just to limber up a little. And then sit, and don't try, just relax and watch the breath and notice the discomfort in the body. Focus a little on the areas where it's predominant, and then notice the areas where it isn't. And this is teaching you about suffering. You'll notice also some pain isn't in a specific place, it moves around. And when it's moved from one place to another, that place where you first notice it is no longer in pain, but another place is. And this is, again, anicca, impermanence. But the positive aspect of old age is time. You may not have time in terms of numbers of years, we may not have time in terms of numbers of years, but on a daily basis, very often we have more time to practice the teachings of the Buddha, practice this sila, samadhi and panya. And for the younger people watching, with relatives, friends, older people you know, please don't go around saying, hey, the Buddha said you should do this and you should do that, you should become Buddhist, because that's never going to work. Unless, of course, they're already Buddhists, and then you're going to encourage them. And it's not a case of wanting anything to work. You don't want to change anybody's views. Just give them some extra tools to relieve the suffering they have. Maybe show them some nice books of Dharma stories which are just demonstrating how people have, well, any books of Dharma talks are going to be just talking about sila, samadhi and panya. And however that's worded can help anyone in any situation. So that is the thing to do. And we are then, as younger people, not only helping our senior, which is one of the highest blessings, whether they're family or not, helping the elders, respecting the elders, is such a meritorious activity. And it can be just simply something like going round and dropping off a calendar, or going round and dropping off a little book that you've picked up from a temple or a monastery, a little pamphlet. You know, they may just put it on the side, they may throw it in the bin, it doesn't matter. One day they'll pick it up. I've given my mother a book 9-10 years ago, and she was talking about it to me on the phone. Oh, it's such a nice book, she was saying. And I thought, I gave that to you 9 years ago, but you're picking it up now, so that's good enough. And there's an example. And she's 81. Now she's not going to go running to the monastery, shaving off her head and becoming a nun or a mechi, but if she can get some comfort from reading such a book, then she's happy and I'm very happy, and we can all do the same. So I will go and investigate my house guests, see what they're up to. The geckos have gone quiet, and I'll go and say hello to the dogs, and for now I'll say good night and thank you.